She was 6 years old. She never saw the morning light. JonBenét Ramsey, beauty queen, child of wealth, darling of cameras, was found dead in the basement of her home in Boulder, Colorado, the day after Christmas in 1996. It's a case that has endured not because of what is known, but because of what remains unsaid. A girl dies in her own home, and nearly 3 decades later, no one knows who did it, or no one has said, "My name is not important." But I've followed cases like this for longer than most detectives have been alive. The longer they go unsolved, the more they slip between the cracks of memory and evidence. But some never let go. By the way, if you're listening to this story in the middle of the night, or lying in a dark room, or somewhere on your way home, leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so every time I tell a new story, you'll be the first to hear it, in the right place, at the right time. Let's go back to Boulder. December 26, 1996. The Ramsey house was quiet when Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, walked downstairs early that morning. The Christmas tree lights were still glowing, snow coated the streets outside, but something stopped her at the foot of the stairs. A note, a ransom note. It was long, very long. It said JonBenét had been taken. According to the note, the kidnappers wanted $118,000. A very specific number, oddly close to the bonus John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, had received that year. The note warned not to call the police. But Patsy called 911 immediately. JonBenét's older brother, Burke, was still in the house. He was 9 years old. John Ramsey searched the house with a friend. At 1:05 p.m., he opened a door to the wine cellar in the basement. That's where he found her. His daughter, on the cold floor, covered by a white blanket, duct tape across her mouth, a cord around her neck, her wrists tied, a garrote fashioned from a paintbrush found in the home. Patsy screamed. The Boulder police had never handled a case like this. Not a child murdered in her own home. Not a ransom note followed by a body found indoors. From the beginning, the case was strange. It still is. The official cause of death: strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner placed the time of death between late-night December 25th and the early hours of the 26th. There were signs of sexual trauma, but no definitive evidence of rape, no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints on the note. The only DNA found was unidentified and partial. The world learned about JonBenét not as a daughter or a child lost, but as a pageant girl. Her photos were everywhere. She wore tiaras and gowns. She smiled with perfect teeth. A child paraded for beauty. America watched, and the world judged. Rumors swirled immediately. The media descended like vultures. The public took sides. Some blamed the parents. Some blamed the police. Some saw a stranger. Some saw a cover-up. But in the early days, all that existed was a house full of secrets. A letter that said she was alive. A father who found her dead. A mother in hysteria. And a little girl who never woke up. The note itself was bizarre. 3 pages. Typed? No, handwritten. A mix of movie references, strange capitalizations, and emotional manipulation. It didn't read like a real ransom note. It read like a script. But who would write something like that, and why? The Ramseys cooperated at first, but not entirely. They hired lawyers, a PR team. They agreed to interviews, on television, but delayed full police interviews for months. People noticed. People whispered. But there was no arrest, no charges, no trial, just grief and suspicion. And still, there were facts. The window in the basement was open. A suitcase was beneath it, like someone used it to step down, but spiderwebs near the frame were untouched. No footprints in the snow outside. JonBenét had pineapple in her stomach, but none was served at dinner. A bowl of pineapple was found in the kitchen, with Burke's fingerprints on it. The time of death didn't match the story of the night before. Still, no confession, no real evidence. Only a house that knew more than it told. Only silence. By nightfall on December 26th, the police had cordoned off the home. But the damage was done. Friends had walked through it. The father had carried the body upstairs, the note had been handled, the scene was tainted, and the story had only begun. Let's slow it down. What happened between the evening of December 25th and the discovery on the 26th remains the axis of this entire case. The Ramseys hosted a Christmas dinner. They visited friends. They came home. They say JonBenét was asleep when they carried her upstairs. That was the last time, they say, they saw her alive. But in cases like this, truth hides in the gaps, not in what's said, but in what isn't. Patsy Ramsey says she woke up early, sometime around 5:30 a.m., to get ready for a family trip to Michigan. She says she walked downstairs in her clothes from the night before, still in her makeup, and found the ransom note on the staircase. She screamed. She woke John. They called the police at 5:52 a.m. The 911 call is still chilling, not because of what's heard, but because of what isn't. Patsy sounds frantic. John is barely heard. At the end of the call, she hangs up, but the line stays open. Some claim you can hear whispering, a young child's voice, maybe Burke's. But audio experts disagree. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Rick French responded first. He checked the house, but didn't open the small basement door where JonBenét's body lay. He was told it had already been searched. He believed them. Detective Linda Arndt arrived at 8:10 a.m. She was the only detective on scene for several hours. She described herself as alone, feeling unprepared, surrounded by a wealthy family, friends, and a growing media frenzy. She would later say she feared the killer might still be in the house. At some point, John Ramsey disappeared from her sight. Minutes later, he was found carrying JonBenét's body up from the basement, her little frame wrapped in a white blanket, her arms stiff from rigor mortis. That moment, John touching the body, contaminated a crime scene that had already been compromised. The last time JonBenét was confirmed alive was Christmas night. The Ramseys visited the Whites, a family friend's home. They returned home around 9:30 p.m., by their own account. JonBenét was asleep, they said. She was carried upstairs, put in bed. No one else reported seeing her after that. But there's more. In the kitchen, a bowl of pineapple sat on the table, not part of dinner. JonBenét's fingerprints weren't on it, but Burke's were. JonBenét had pineapple in her small intestine. That means she ate it not long before death. So the question is, when did she eat it? Who gave it to her? Was she awake after the Ramseys said she went to sleep? Burke, in his later interview, said he didn't remember. He may have been awake. He may have gone downstairs. His parents said he slept through everything, even the chaos the next morning. Some find that hard to believe. But he was 9. Children sleep deeply, or say they do. Then there's the ransom note. It was found on the back staircase, written in shaky, inconsistent handwriting. It was long, over 370 words. Most ransom notes are short. Director. This one was strange. It began with, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully." It asked for $118,000. That exact number was John's bonus from work that year, a detail not widely known. The note was signed, Victory. SBTC. No one knows what SBTC means. Some say it's meaningless. Others believe it's symbolic. But nothing concrete ever came from it. Handwriting analysis was done. Experts said Patsy could not be excluded as the author. But that doesn't mean she wrote it. It means they couldn't prove she didn't. John was ruled out as the writer. Burke was too young. The paper the note was written on came from inside the house. The pen, too. Someone wrote that note in the Ramsey home. Some experts believe a draft was written beforehand, also found on the notepad. That implies time, composure. Would an intruder break in, kill a child, and then calmly write a long note? Or did someone in the house try to stage a kidnapping after something else had happened? These are the questions investigators faced in the early hours, but they were already behind. There were no signs of forced entry. There was a broken window in the basement, but no disturbance on the ledge. Spiderwebs were still intact, dust undisturbed. Outside, the snow was fresh. No footprints. No obvious intruder trail. If someone came in, they left no trace. Inside, friends and neighbors arrived to comfort the Ramseys. They moved through the house freely. They cleaned the kitchen. They touched surfaces. They waited. And in the basement, JonBenét was still there, hidden, quiet, alone. Until her father opened that door. He said he hadn't checked it earlier because he knew she wouldn't be there, but she was. Time of death estimates put it between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., blunt force trauma to the skull, then strangulation, or vice versa. The order isn't certain. She had a head injury consistent with a heavy blow, a flashlight perhaps. No blood, internal bleeding, a slow death. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. She may not have screamed. Some said she had been molested, but DNA evidence was inconclusive. There was no semen. There were fibers. There was a partial DNA profile in her underwear, but it didn't match any Ramsey. To this day, it still hasn't matched anyone. Still, questions remain. Why was the house not sealed? Why was the ransom note so long? Why did the parents refuse full interviews for months? Why was JonBenét found by her father, not police? And why? Why did a little girl die in the safest place she knew? The hours before dawn are the quietest in a crime. They're also the most important. What happened that night didn't leave many answers, but it left scars and silence. The crime scene wasn't. A murder had taken place. But the house on 755 15th Street didn't look like a place where someone had been killed. It looked like a house trying not to wake up. The Boulder Police Department hadn't dealt with many homicides. And none like this, not involving a child, not in a mansion, not with two influential, wealthy parents at the center. There was pressure, from the community, from the media, from the Ramseys' legal team. But the clock kept ticking. Evidence kept vanishing. And whatever truth remained, it was getting colder. Let's start with the basics. When the 911 call came in, officers arrived and did not treat the house as a potential crime scene. They allowed friends and family to enter, to move freely, to clean. JonBenét's bedroom was taped off, but the rest of the house was left open. The ransom note was not preserved. It was picked up. Read, handled, passed around. The body, when discovered, was moved. John Ramsey carried her upstairs. He laid her down near the Christmas tree. He covered her again. To a father, that might be instinct. To a detective, it's contamination. It meant fibers would mix, positions would shift, time of death became harder to determine, and crucial forensic evidence might have been wiped away. That's how the investigation began. The ransom note remains one of the strangest documents in modern crime. Whoever wrote it took time, calm, confidence, maybe even practice. Parts of the note mimic lines from movies like Dirty Harry and Speed. Phrases like, "Use that good Southern common sense of yours," and "Don't try to grow a brain" echo dialogue. This raised eyebrows. Who would use pop culture references when writing a ransom note about a child? And then there's the writing style, grandiose, meandering, almost theatrical. The writer refers to JonBenét as safe and unharmed at a time when, by all accounts, she had already been dead for hours. The note also says they represent a small foreign faction. No such group has ever been found. Was it a deliberate misdirection? The amount demanded, $118,000, was too specific. It aligned almost perfectly with John Ramsey's recent work bonus. That detail wasn't public. So, either someone close to the family knew, or someone inside the family wrote the note. The notepad it was written on? Patsy's, the pen, found beside it, all from within the house. No fingerprints were recovered from the paper, except Patsy's, when she handed it to police. Investigators believe the note was written inside the house after the murder. That would mean the killer had time, privacy, a calm enough state to sit down and fabricate a narrative. If it was an intruder, they didn't panic. They didn't rush. They wrote. Neatly. Now let's talk about the basement. It was a maze. Wine cellar, utility areas, low ceilings. The window in the basement was broken, but that had reportedly happened months earlier. A suitcase had been placed beneath it. Some theorized it was used as a stepping stool, but there was no dirt, no disturbance on the ledge, no snow tracks outside, no sign of forced entry on doors. JonBenét was found in a small room, sometimes called the wine cellar, though it held no wine. She had duct tape over her mouth, which left no DNA trace. A cord was wrapped tightly around her neck. Attached to the cord was the broken handle of a paintbrush, taken from Patsy's art supplies, inside the home. The ligature suggested strangulation with intent, deliberate, forceful. The skull fracture was 8 inches long. Either injury could have caused death. No footprints, no fingerprints, just fibers. Some matched Patsy's clothes, some matched a blanket. Others were never identified. Here's another detail. The Ramseys claimed to have gone to bed shortly after getting home. They said they didn't hear anything during the night, but a neighbor, Melody Stanton, reported hearing a child scream around midnight. Her husband said he heard something too, a metallic bang, perhaps. Police never fully verified those reports. And later, the Stantons changed or clarified their statements. It happens often. Memory shifts, especially under pressure. Still, it raised a question. If there was a scream, why didn't the Ramseys hear it? The phone records were normal. No calls in or out between 10 p.m. and the early morning. Nothing suggesting communication with anyone outside the house. At this point, detectives began forming 2 theories. 1, there was an intruder, someone who broke in, hid, waited, then killed JonBenét and staged a kidnapping. 2, the crime happened inside the family, and the scene was staged to look like an intruder was responsible. But there was no evidence of a break-in, and no signs of a stranger. Detective Linda Arndt later testified she felt something was off during her time in the home. She said she counted the bullets in her service weapon because she didn't know who she could trust. That's not a feeling detectives have lightly. Still, the Ramseys were not formally declared suspects at that point. They hired private investigators, lawyers, spokespeople. They appeared on CNN on 2020. They told their story to the public but resisted full police interviews until months later. This raised suspicion. But suspicion isn't evidence. There were no eyewitnesses, no usable DNA matches, no clear motive, and still, at the center of it all, was a little girl who'd been silenced. Whoever killed JonBenét had time. Time to write a letter. Time to move her body. Time to think. That's not how most intruders behave, and it's certainly not how strangers act. The police were starting to realize this wasn't just a mystery. It was a performance, and someone somewhere in that house had played their part well. The more closely you listen to what people say, the louder their silences become. In this part of the investigation, we step away from the physical evidence and into behavior, language, emotion, contradiction. We begin with the ransom note. Again, experts in forensic linguistics have dissected it for years, not just what it says, but how it says it. The tone is peculiar, at times formal, at times almost sarcastic. The note addresses John Ramsey directly, never Patsy. And that's strange, because it was Patsy who found it. There are capitalizations where none are needed, references to your bank, to 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter, to execution and foreign faction. It's not the wording of a desperate criminal. It reads more like a screenplay, or a distraction. Then there's the phrase, "Don't try to grow a brain." It's lifted nearly word for word from Speed, a film released just 2 years earlier. Coincidence? Some say yes. But if this was written by a stranger, why reference pop culture? Now we move to the statements. What the Ramseys said or didn't say in interviews with police, and later, the media. John Ramsey's early answers were calm, almost measured. Some said too calm. Patsy's were emotional, erratic, as expected from a grieving mother. But some investigators believed her emotions were too staged, too timed. Her breakdowns seemed to come and go, almost as if on cue. In their police interviews, both parents struggled to recall specifics. What time they went to bed. Who gave JonBenét her last meal. Who had last seen her. They often deferred to each other, or to, I don't remember. Burke Ramsey was questioned too. First as a child, then, later, as an adult. In 1998, he was interviewed by a child psychologist under the supervision of law enforcement. His answers were strange, sometimes vague, sometimes too rehearsed. He seemed detached, almost cheerful. He said he didn't hear anything that night. He didn't leave his room. He didn't wake up until his mother was screaming. He asked if they had found JonBenét yet, before being told she was missing. Some believe Burke was simply a confused, traumatized child. Others believe he knew more than he said. Let's return to the pineapple. It was in her stomach, undigested, which means she ate it not long before death. The bowl in the kitchen had Burke's fingerprints, the spoon too, but both John and Patsy denied giving it to her. Burke didn't remember. Did she wake up and eat it herself? Did Burke give it to her? The theory for some is chilling, that JonBenét woke up and took some of her brother's food, that an argument began, that something happened, an accident, a push, a blow to the head. The flashlight on the kitchen counter, wiped clean of prints, matched the dimensions of her skull fracture. It had been placed there neatly. No prints, not even the Ramseys. That, investigators say, is unusual. Most families don't clean flashlights. Not at midnight. Not before calling 911. If Burke had hit her in anger, and she died, what would a family do? That's the basis of one theory. A tragic accident. A cover-up. A desperate attempt to protect a child by sacrificing the truth. Now, let's consider motive. For a stranger, the motive is unclear. Nothing was stolen. No sexual evidence was found, no ransom was collected, no demand was followed up. For the parents, motive is murkier. Was it frustration? A snap of temper? An accidental death they tried to disguise? Was it a rage killing? The injuries suggest staging. The garrote was complex, purposeful, almost too sophisticated. But the tape, the bindings, the blanket, the note, all suggest intent, planning, and yet, if it was staged poorly. So the contradiction is this: either it was a meticulous, premeditated act, done stupidly, or it was an impulsive, panicked event, staged cleverly. But it can't be both. In 1999, the Boulder grand jury voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child endangerment and hindering prosecution. But the district attorney declined to pursue the charges. He said there wasn't enough evidence. That's important. A grand jury believed the Ramseys were involved, but they were never charged. In 2008, DNA evidence cleared them publicly. New testing showed that an unidentified male DNA profile, found on JonBenét's underwear, did not match any family member. The DA released a statement. The Ramseys were declared no longer under suspicion. But many experts disagreed. The DNA was partial, inconclusive. It could have come from manufacturing, contamination, a lab worker. It was not a match, but it was not proof of innocence either. JonBenét's murder was becoming more legend than investigation. The town of Boulder turned inward. The case became taboo. Police leadership changed. Investigators resigned. Files were locked, and the questions kept growing. Why did the Ramseys delay formal police interviews? Why did Patsy wear the same clothes from the night before? Why did no one hear a scream? Why did no one confess? Why, when the house was full of people, did no one see what happened? The answers may be buried in the behavior, in the inconsistencies, in the way each sentence shifts, hesitates, avoids, because the facts of this case aren't just written in blood. They're written in the spaces between words. Theories in this case are like shattered glass, scattered, sharp, and impossible to piece back into a perfect picture. But let's pick up each one slowly. Theory 1, the intruder. This is the theory the Ramseys supported from the very beginning. They believe someone broke into the house that night, slipped through the broken basement window, hid until the family was asleep, then struck. They argue that the unknown male DNA on JonBenét's underwear is the strongest proof, that it didn't match any family member, that it must belong to her killer. They point to reports of a suspicious man seen near the Ramsey house in the days before Christmas. They mention the open basement window, the suitcase beneath it, the broken latch on one of the doors, and they ask, why would anyone inside the family stage a kidnapping if they could simply say it was a tragedy? But the problems with this theory are too many. There were no footprints in the snow outside the house that night, no signs of forced entry, no disturbances in the dust near the window ledge. The ransom note was written inside the house, on family stationery, using a family pen. It took time, confidence. Would an intruder risk all that, while the family slept upstairs? Also, the window that supposedly served as the entry point had a spiderweb stretching across the frame. It was intact, unbroken. If someone had crawled through it, that web should have been gone. Then there's the question of behavior. If this were a real kidnapping, why leave the child's body behind? Why write a note at all? And why ask for $118,000, an oddly specific figure matching John Ramsey's bonus? It doesn't fit the pattern of a professional kidnapper. Theory 2, the parents. This is the theory that gained traction early, especially with law enforcement. The ransom note, many believed, was a fabrication, a clumsy attempt to make the scene look like a kidnapping. The note's length, its tone, and its internal references didn't match any known ransom format. Handwriting analysts said Patsy Ramsey could not be excluded as the author. The word attaché, oddly placed in the note, was found misspelled the same way in her other writings. She was right-handed, the slant of the note matched. And then there's the emotional layer. The note calls JonBenét safe and unharmed, even though she was already dead. It speaks like a mother trying to soften the horror, not like a criminal making demands. As for motive, some theorists believe there was a trigger. Bedwetting, behavioral frustration. A parent snapped, struck too hard, and then staged the rest. But the staging itself, the garrote, the note, the duct tape, was complicated. Too complicated, some argue, for a rushed cleanup. Would a mother go that far to cover up an accident? And if the parents were guilty, why call the police at all? Still, police noted inconsistencies. Patsy claimed to have gone to bed at 10 p.m., then awoken just before 6 a.m., in the same clothes she wore the night before. Why no change? John found the body in a location others had checked. Why was he the one to open that door? They hired attorneys before sitting for a full interview. Why? The parents were never formally charged, but for years, suspicion clung to them like fog. Theory 3. The brother, Burke. This is the most sensitive and perhaps the most quietly disturbing. Some believe Burke, only 9 at the time, may have struck his sister during an argument, over food, over attention, over anything. The theory suggests he used the flashlight. The blow to her head lines up with its dimensions. She fell. She died. And the parents, panicked, staged the rest. In 1998, Burke was interviewed extensively. He was calm, detached. He smiled often. Some say that's trauma. Others say it's something else. His fingerprints were on the pineapple bowl. His parents denied he had eaten it. If Burke were responsible and the parents covered it up, it would explain the behavior. The long delay before interviews, the refusal to take polygraphs, the need to control the narrative. But there are challenges to this theory too. Could a 9-year-old build a complex ligature device? Could he carry out such precise staging? Or did someone else do that after the fact? No one saw anything. No one heard anything. All 3 Ramseys were in the house that night, but no one can say who did what. There are also outliers, former suspects like Bill McReynolds, the man who played Santa Claus at a Ramsey Christmas party. He was eccentric, odd. He gave JonBenét a gift, he wrote poems, but he had an alibi. DNA didn't match. There was Gary Oliva, a known sex offender in Boulder. He was arrested years later on unrelated charges. He reportedly had a photo of JonBenét in his backpack. But again, no forensic evidence tied him to the scene. The police pursued hundreds of leads. More than 1,400 people were looked into, but no arrest was ever made. In 2006, a man named John Mark Carr falsely confessed to the killing. He said he loved JonBenét, said he was with her when she died. But his DNA didn't match. His story didn't hold. He was a disturbed man seeking attention. He was never charged. And so the theories remain. Each one plausible, each one flawed. They compete with each other in courtrooms, documentaries, headlines, and none has ever held in court. Because this case isn't about what could have happened. It's about what no one can prove. As the years passed, the case of JonBenét Ramsey became something else. No longer just a murder, no longer a mystery. It became a legend, a symbol of unsolved grief, a study in public suspicion, media obsession, and institutional failure. The Boulder Police Department, overwhelmed, undertrained, and divided, couldn't contain it. The district attorney's office, under pressure, politically and legally, couldn't prosecute it. And the Ramseys, protected by wealth, media consultants, and lawyers, remained a family in mourning and in shadow. By the early 2000s, the case had stalled. New detectives took over. Cold case units formed. But no charges were ever filed. No one was ever arrested. Instead, the investigation splintered into public theories, television specials, and internet speculation. Every detail was pored over again and again. Every second of the 911 call, every line of the ransom note, every photo, every word, every silence. Then, in 2008, something changed. The Boulder District Attorney's Office announced that touch DNA testing on JonBenét's clothing had uncovered a previously undetected male DNA profile, this time on the waistband of her underwear. It matched the earlier DNA found in a separate location on the same garment. It did not match John, Patsy, or Burke. And with that announcement, the DA issued a public apology. The Ramseys were officially cleared. But not everyone agreed. Many forensic experts questioned the reliability of the findings. Touch DNA is a fragile science, prone to contamination. That DNA could have come from the factory where the clothes were made, or from someone handling them during packaging. What it proved, definitively, was still unclear. But for the public, the apology was a turning point. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006, before the exoneration, after battling ovarian cancer. She never saw her name cleared by authorities. John Ramsey remarried. Burke, as of his most recent public appearance, lives a quiet, private life. He broke his silence in 2016 in a nationally televised interview with Dr. Phil. He was calm. He smiled often. He said he had nothing to do with his sister's death. Still, for many, the suspicion remains, unspoken, lingering. In 2013, it was revealed that the grand jury had, in fact, voted to indict both parents in 1999. The charges? Child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. But the district attorney refused to sign the indictment, citing lack of evidence. That fact, hidden for over a decade, reignited public debate. Why indict if there wasn't enough evidence? Why conceal it if justice was the goal? The truth perhaps lies not in the law, but in the silence. There is no statute of limitations for murder in Colorado. The case remains open. Every few years, law enforcement releases a statement. A new DNA test, a new specialist, a new tip, but no arrest. The house on 15th Street was sold long ago, renovated, the basement remodeled, the neighborhood moved on, but something remains in the walls, something that can't be painted over. Let's review what we know and what we don't. We know JonBenét died by strangulation and blunt force trauma. We know there was no forced entry, no ransom paid, no verified intruder. We know the ransom note was written inside the house. We know the crime scene was contaminated. We know the family lawyered up quickly. We know the DNA does not match any family member, but also doesn't match anyone known. We know the grand jury voted to indict. We know the DA declined to prosecute. And we know that someone got away with it. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? There's no answer I can give you, no hidden clue, no final reveal, because sometimes the most haunting cases are not the ones that are unsolved. They're the ones that were never fully pursued. Maybe the truth was there in the first 24 hours. Maybe it was lost the moment that body was moved, the moment the note was handled, the moment the world rushed in and swallowed up a quiet Colorado morning. JonBenét never made it to the new year, and the rest of us never got the ending. In the quiet corners of every town, there's a case that never leaves. In Boulder, it was JonBenét. Some call it a tragedy, others call it a cover-up, and some believe it was simply an accident, a night that spiraled out of control, too fast to stop, too painful to tell. But the truth is this: JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. She lived in a house filled with lights, gifts, cameras, and secrets. She died on the cold floor of a basement. And in nearly 30 years, with thousands of tips, interviews, and pages of evidence, no one has been held accountable. That's the part that matters. Not the tabloid headlines, not the pageant photos, not the internet debates, but the fact that a child was murdered and no one was brought to justice. That's the haunting. That's why this story still lingers, because it asks a question we're afraid to answer. What happens when truth is right there, locked in a house with 3 people, and we still can't find it? Some believe we'll never know. Others believe someone still does, so the case remains open, cold, and watching. And somewhere, whether in a drawer, a memory, or a conscience, there may be one detail, one voice, one confession still waiting to surface. Until then, JonBenét is more than a victim. She's a reminder that even in the quietest homes, behind the brightest lights, the darkest truths can live undetected. And justice doesn't always knock. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.